So, hello, Mr. Hugh Maxwell, and thank you for joining me today.
Hi, Grant. Great to see you again. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you, Hugh. So, for those of you watching, this is the first in a series of interviews being conducted by the IIRSM Emerging Risk Leaders Network, whereby we speak to high-profile risk professionals such as you to hear about their experiences and also their views on risk management now and into the future. So, the interview is made of 10 questions, which have been shortlisted from a pool of around 30 submitted by members of the Emerging Risk Leaders Network. So Hugh, before we get started, please can you briefly introduce yourself to the viewers?
Okay, well, hello and welcome to those of you who I've not met or had the chance to interact with before. My name is Hugh Maxwell. I'm a fellow of the IIRSM since 2007, and I'm currently employed by Chubb Global Risk Advisors as Business Development Director for Europe, Middle East and Africa. I've been in this role since February 2020, and Chubb is the largest publicly traded property and casualty insurance company and the largest commercial insurer in the US. So my work supports the insurance side of the business, but from the HSE and risk management side of things, helping to ensure legal compliance and improve risk management and improvement opportunities for a range of companies and industries, covering the full spectrum of Fortune 500 and a range of FTSE 250 businesses. So I have a long-term engagement with the IIRSM, having been a member since the 1990s. I currently chair the IIRSM Fellowship Committee and had the honour to support the IIRSM chairing a COVID-19 recovery webinars last year. I've known Grant pretty closely in our mentoring partnership since the pilot program was launched a few years ago. I'm also a fellow of the Chartered Management Institute and the Institute of Leadership and Management. So broadly speaking, I've got over 25 years experience in industry, a lot of it high risk manufacturing, supplying the steel and foundry industries. I myself have been responsible for implementing a lot of management systems, a lot of strategic solutions from a risk perspective, building teams, developing people, trying to increase engagement and ownership in terms of improving the risk profile of a number of businesses across multitudes of cultures in more than 80 countries around the world. I was actually counting up earlier. So I've been quite lucky in terms of being able to get that type of exposure and engagement. A lot of it's been high risk environments, and I was honoured to actually receive the first IIRSM Business Excellence Award for Risk Excellence, International Risk Excellence in 2018. And thanks largely to the support of Grant, I was equally honoured in 2019 to be awarded the IIRSM Award of Mentor of the Year. And earlier this year, I was actually named as one of the top 10 health and safety influencers by Health and Safety People this year. So a lot of that really isn't down to what I've done, it's more down to my engagement with others. And I'm still very passionate about sharing knowledge, skills and mentoring, still actively engaged in the IIRSM mentoring program. And really, it's just an honour to be welcomed by you guys and girls to give this first webinar. So hopefully I can try and give some more and share some of my insights in some other areas outside of what we do already.
Well, Hugh, thank you for that. It sounds like we're going to be learning a lot from you today. So just a pre-warning. So this interview is about you, Hugh, about your experiences and your views. So I'm going to try my best to stick to the questions. And we'll get through those 10 questions. So without further ado, let's begin. So the first question we have for you from the Emerging Risk Leaders Network: what are the biggest personal lessons you have learned from your time as a risk professional?
Well, I said, I think I've been quite lucky, quite honoured in some respects to get really a global perspective and also a strategic perspective, being with a number of PLCs and senior management roles. But I think there's some key learning points for us all to go away. And I'll be quite honest with you, I'm still learning now, as you know, in yourself, Grant, when you move into different roles, I think the more that you think you know, the less you actually know. Because that's the one thing you find out. There's always something that comes across that comes up that you've never uncovered before. So really, it's nice to be inquisitive, but the real big challenges for me, really, particularly in terms of risk management going forward, is try to always prepare for the unexpected. A lot of this really basis on trying to think about the worst case scenario. Like when you do a risk assessment, look, considering normal, abnormal, and emergency conditions, try and think what's the worst possible things that can happen. So I can assure you, you always get that curveball that comes in you from a different angle. You think you've got all the emergency plans in place, you've got the risk register, but you don't know what's around the corner, just as we experienced with COVID. And I made this point really, the fact that, you know, always expect the unexpected. You don't always have all the answers, so it's important to try and build and engage with others as much as possible, both within our own risk community and within other industries. But also, I think it's important to recognise that risk management is virtuous and ongoing. And this was, again, as we saw with COVID, ever changing. So by trying to encourage ourselves to learn and share from each other and keep up to date with whatever trends or changes there are out there, that enables us to be more open-minded when it comes to accepting and managing risks. And there are a lot of risks out there that we can't eliminate, that will never be zero risk. I mean, one of the most dangerous things we do is drive or cross the roads. So it's important to try and take a risk-based approach in what we do in terms of our strategies, in terms of our thinking. And as I said, engaging all of the stakeholders at every level of the business, in every discipline of the business, making them a little mini risk manager, as we try to do with health and safety. The more engagement, the more we can own it. And we don't always see risks from the perspective that they do. And it's important that we recognise that the person at the sharp end is exposed to that risk. So it's important we learn from them and put the right risk mitigation strategy in place to try and deal with that. And again, this back to this change scenario. Always be prepared for change. Don't try and take the we've always done it this way approach. Always be open-minded about not just the current solutions, but as technologies and as we make greater use of artificial intelligence, be much more open and much more accepting and embracing of some of these changes. They may not always work, but try them because it may be a new solution. It may give you that sort of eureka moment to actually take a different approach to dealing with the risk. So that's
I'm glad you brought that up, Q. Actually,
yeah.
I saw a sign on a site the other day. It was the most dangerous phrase in the English language is "We've always done it this way."
I've
So
always thought that. That's right. There's always that. Yeah. And the other thing that scares me when I talk to some of my international colleagues, because sometimes people don't like to lose face. They like to. The other two words that that always give set fear in my bones: no problem. Because if you know, sometimes I think, well, that's a little bit dicier than I'd think. You know, so I'd like to think people, you know, rather than coming to me and saying no problem, we'll give it some thought. We'll go, you know. So sometimes, not rather than be dismissive, it may not be dismissive. It's just the fact. Sometimes I think we accept a lot of risks. We think that we're safe, but sometimes looking under the surface, are we always as safe as we think we are?
Thank you, Hugh. Very good. So Hugh, the next question, me and you talk about this a lot when we have our mentoring conversations. It's soft skills and transferable skills. So what soft skills and transferable skills do risk professionals need to succeed?
I think more and more, the more influential you try to be with other professionals and other stakeholders from other disciplines, the softer skills become probably more important than the actual technical skills. And this is sort of changes as we discussed a few times one-on-one. As you move into different roles and try and increase your level of influence across the business or to other stakeholders, the soft skills really do come into command. And particularly, first and foremost, communication, whether it's listening or it's delivering that message, whether it's influencing, but equally important, things like empathy. It's all right understanding what the senior management team want to try and implement in a certain environment, but you've got to face it from the sharp end so that you know what the implications are for the person doing the job. It's important that you take that into account as well. And again, decision making, prioritizing, problem solving, these are all key elements, critical thinking, so that you try and make sure that you're putting into place realistic and pragmatic solutions sometimes. Teamwork, engaging the people, adaptability, they're all different things that the actual focus and priority of these things can change depending upon the situation and depending upon what you're actually trying to achieve and what you're trying to influence and at what level. I mean, that's not an exhaustive list. They're just the ones that spring to mind based on, excuse me, probably the past couple of weeks, the things I've been working on. But there's no ending. So I hope that's given you an overview just to show really yes, it's great being important that we're actually competent in the areas that we need, but in order to implement those, it's these softer skills that really help us to build that trust and be recognised for being successful in achieving the desired outcome, not just for the senior member stakeholders, but for other members of the team who are perhaps more adversely affected by those risks.
Absolutely, and I guess as you move into more leadership roles, Hugh, those soft skills are more and more important. And as you've said, they almost become more important than the technical skills. It's that ability to influence and engage ideas. So.
And at times they do, particularly if you're feeling under pressure sometimes. And again, resilience, things like this where you're managing yourself and knowing sometimes when to walk away or when to approach a person. People, as well as looking from a risk perspective, they may be wearing different hats in the business, have different responsibilities. It's knowing how and knowing when to approach the people. So another one, I mean, there's an unwritten one, I think, really is is reading people and reading the situation. So it's no good if this guy or this lady is overloaded with lots and lots of things to do, and you approach them and put one more. It may be the straw that breaks the camel's back by putting one more burden on them. Whereas, perhaps the better approach sometimes is going there and say, what can I take off you? What can I make things easier for you? And then give them time and approach them afterwards. So I think sometimes timing and knowing people and knowing how to approach people is important as well.
Absolutely, particularly in the new business as well. Hanging fruit, understanding of people's problems and burdens.
Yeah.
So, would you say that a risk professional and business leader can be the same thing, and are they compatible?
Well, I truly believe, I think each and every one of us, whether we're in an engineering environment, whether in a maintenance, whether in production, doesn't matter what we do, there's natural leaders. And I believe to do any job, to do it well, there's only one safest way to do it. There's only one way to do it right for the quality. So yes, I do believe there's a large crossover in terms of what a risk professional, what a business leader should be. And again, there's a lot of synergies there in terms of the skill set, not just being technically competent, but having the soft skills that make you effective as a risk manager that you would expect a leader to be effective with. Because ultimately that's what you're doing. You're leading the management of risk within the business. And that people turn to you or people come to you, not just for your expertise, but sometimes, as we know, to try and prioritize, to try and see what are the significant issues from the great many. So yes, I think there's a lot of commonality and a lot of oversight. I think moving forward, there's probably much more so, and hopefully there'll be much more recognition for the risk leaders as well.
And certainly, we spoke about this in conversations. I'm seeing it more and more. Health and safety professionals, risk professionals are being included in senior teams on many sites, particularly my manufacturing. We're seeing that more and more. And you are included and brought into the disciplines to lead that site. So I've seen that firsthand.
Yeah, and again, even when it comes to sort of, we talk about cradle to grave approach in terms of sustainability. Well, I like to think nowadays a pre-cradle to post-grave, because the consideration is much deeper. It's so important that we involve these risk professionals at the stage of building it in as early as possible, taking a risk-based approach, whether it's raw material supply, whether it's labour supply, whether it's the actual process safety itself. And it's important that the materials we're handling, or the way we do the task, whether it's ergonomics or whatever, it's important that risk is considered through every stage of the process, including the pre-planning stages, and especially when it comes to things like capital expenditure. The real forward-thinking companies, the real successful companies, are the ones that have got this risk-based approach, this resilience from pre-start to pre-closure. And I think this is why some companies have fared better through COVID than others, by having this inherent resilience or this inherent, I wouldn't say welcoming risk, I wouldn't say risk takers, but more risk acceptance in terms of making it part of their general business processes.
Absolutely, and here you've just raised COVID-19 there. So, do you think, I'm interested to hear your answer to this one. Do you think the pandemic, in your opinion, has it strengthened or weakened the risk management profession?
Well, I think because it's still early, I say it's early days, and I think we're still not really clear what the full implications of COVID-19 is globally, or even really within each of the countries around the globe. I think it's still early days for us to say. I think it's definitely raised the profile. It's definitely raised the engagement and the importance of people recognising of risk professionals. But whether or not this is, I really truly hope it is sustained. But I think it's still too early days for us to say It's really changed the profile. It's really changed people's views of the importance. I think the one thing it has done, probably, it's engaged everybody at all levels much more in risk. And people are recognising that workplace risks are not purely the physical risks that we see. I know there's been a big thing recently as well towards mental wellness, mental welfare, but I think the one thing that's actually prompted people to realise is this self-reliance or this self-importance when it comes to actually taking ownership of risk. Whereas I think before, with the health and safety work law, people didn't always see this, but I think it's actually made things a little bit more open, a bit more individually responsible for how you go about risk and managing it, part of the risk management profile in the workplace. So hopefully, longer term, it will be that type of solution that we see.
No, that's a really good answer, Hugh. Yeah, everyone is responsible for their own health and safety. We've absolutely seen a shift.
Yeah. And the health and safety of others as well, because we all have good days, bad days, and we can all impact. So I think that's very key that we try to encourage that sort of we care approach across the board and at all levels of the business.
I've seen a few disputes. This was in the middle of the pandemic. You know, people arguing in the middle of a supermarket. One person wasn't wearing a mask, the other one was. So other people, you know, putting it on others.
Well, it just amazes me nowadays. Yeah, I know this. We don't know enough about the vaccine, but we have to rely on what limited information is available to make it what we believe is the right judgment. And I think there's that many. I mean, I know it's a big debate whether to vaccinate or not to vaccinate, and whether it's above your rights. But I think ultimately, if it's a control measure, and we know that it's going to try and help to reduce or to minimise the negative impact that COVID and things have got, we have to try and act responsibly, each and all of us. Which is where, you know, I can understand people getting emotive about the masks. I can understand people feeling that the rights are violated, but it's a big unknown for us. So really, I think it's important that we try and act together responsibly, and again, try and share and learn, and try and ensure that we try and minimise not just the impact on ourselves, but on others.
Excellent. You want to get into the nitty gritty now? Talk about key performance indicators, dashboards. You know, there's many businesses that have those leading, lagging indicators, and they're forever changing focus. And I've seen it within my own business. How do you establish suitable KPIs? What is your benchmarking process?
Well, I think the important thing first and foremost is that KPIs should be meaningful to the business, whether you're at a macro level for an organisation, a multinational organisation, or even if you're a small site or even just a small manufacturing unit. We all need to know that we're reaching the desired outcome or required outcome if you're talking output, productivity, or whatever. The problem is, I think sometimes a lot of businesses sort of let the KPIs manage for them rather than manage the KPIs. I think the important thing is indicative of what we want to try and achieve as a desired outcome, which is why I think it's important that we have to get the right balance between lead and lag indicators. So I think first and foremost, don't overkill them. Make sure that they're smart, in terms of specific, measurable, accurate, realistic, and within a given time frame. So that if something does change, you can react and respond in the appropriate time frame. So whether that's a guy counting his quota on a machine, or whether that's one of the risk management team looking at the number of audits undertaken, the number of positive improvements that came in, or the number of corrective measures or preventive measures. So I think it's important to get the right balance between lead and lag. Lag, obviously, lost events. Unfortunately, something's gone wrong there. It's usually more costly, whereas a good, strong lead indicator. So I try and look at the business, at the size of the business. I try and look at the risk profile, previous risk history of the business. What are the key deliverables? Whether it's a fast-moving consumer good environment, whether it's quick throughput, whether it's high risk, whether it's a process-based thing, and try and assure that the KPIs we put in place to measure, to monitor, and maintain the business performance are realistic and meaningful. And when I talk to the people at the sharp end, whether it's a guy on a machine, whether it's the person who wants that desired output, sometimes I say it's better to have 5 or 6 good lead and lag indicators than have 10 or 20, which are basically, I wouldn't say, and sometimes, I mean, I've been to some great automotive companies, and no disrespect to Toyota, Faurecia, or people like that I work with, but there's been a wall with 40 KPIs on it.
Wow.
And I think, well, who's got, which, yeah, now, admittedly, great, yeah, 40 KPIs, But those
And
critical
what's the split, Hugh, between lagging and leading there, roughly?
To be honest, I find sometimes far too many are, we look too much at the negative, the lag, rather than trying to promote the lead. Now, this is where sometimes I like to see monthly, I like to 3 month, 12-month averages, because sometimes to make a positive impact on the business and to shift the performance can take 3, 6, 9 months, sometimes more, depending on what you're trying to change. Now,
Yeah.
yes, you should have, at the top, yes, there should be all these different KPIs, but there should be specific to little zones of the business. So, for example, if you're monitoring inventory or you're planning, there'll be different KPIs in place there to what the production people have got. If they're in terms of output, in terms of rejects, in terms of accidents. So I try and keep it segmented. I don't believe in silo management, but I believe it's better to give people 5 or 6 things that they can positively own and positively impact upon, rather than 10 or 20 which loses control. So try and maintain a sharp focus on some meaningful lead and lag indicators, again, depending on what the business is or depending on what you're actually having to deal with within the business. So
That's some, yeah.
I'm sorry if it doesn't answer the question fully, but I think it's so important that we don't get lost behind the KPIs, that they mean something for us, but it's something that we can get the people working in that area to take full ownership of, so that if something's going in the wrong direction, they feel the pain. And I don't mean that nasty to upset them, but the ownership's there and they think, I want to put something right about that. You know, that's my measure. Yeah.
No, answered really well, and I'm glad we raised that question, because there are going to be a lot of members that join the Emerging Risk Leaders Network who are fairly new to the profession, coming into their first roles.
Yeah.
Certainly be looking at KPIs. And just one kind of spin-off question around this, Hugh. I've been to a few companies and seen a few dashboards, if you will, that completely exclude lagging indicators. The idea being that the leading will ultimately look after the lagging. Lagging is almost hidden. I think that's mainly been businesses where it's generated a bit of under-reporting.
Right.
Those lagging. Experience anything like that?
I would say some cultures in the past, some of the emerging cultures, for example, India, and not now and not all of the companies, but sometimes not everybody likes to report bad news. Not really like to sell things in a negative light, but it's the bad news, which is basically it's the bad news where people get hurt or where the risks aren't being managed as effectively as possible. So sometimes you have to be upfront with yourself about the bad news, because if you're not upfront with yourself about the bad news, you know, what are we measuring these things for? Ultimately, you want to see improvement. And if these bad things aren't improving, so I think it's important you don't go overboard on the lag stuff. But if it's a cost or if it's waste in terms of personal injury, in terms of materials, in terms of underperformance, it's important to recognise this. Not blame, but try and put the right, really lead indicators and lead drivers in place to try and positively influence these things and drive these things down. So I see the important, a bit like is it yin and yang, you get the balance right with the two to try and ensure that you're going overall. We never get to the ultimate zero accidents. We never get to 100% perfection. Other than obviously, if you've been married a few years, like me, 30 years, your wife's perfect. Other than that, no, but I mean, really, you never get to that level of perfection. But it's important that you try and raise the bar each time. And I think unless you have the two working together in balance, it's not necessarily, you're perhaps fooling yourself and fooling others if you don't recognise that there's other things that you can improve in the business. And I think you should, always revisit these things every so often as well. There are what I call macro KPIs that are important to the business, but there's also these local KPIs that sometimes may be different, but may positively influence or adversely influence the other KPIs. So to me, sometimes in the past, I was a firm believer that you have to have basically policy deployment, where you have the right indicators at the right level of the business to show things are working. And I think sometimes as the business grows, we keep a lot of the KPIs in place because we've always had them there. And there's like a comfort that we're getting well, where our LTI rate's only 1.2 still. But the fact you've got other things going on there that could negatively or adversely impact on that, I think it's very important that you sometimes revisit your KPIs and make them specific to the activity you've got going on at a local level.
No, really helpful, Hugh. Thanks for that. So, financial, legal, or moral reasoning. Which do you find that you use most commonly to influence others?
Well, again, I think it depends. It's a difficult one, this one, because it really depends on who you're talking to,
Of course, yeah.
when you're talking to, and what you're talking to them about. So sometimes it really depends on the level of risk that you're actually dealing with. It depends. It's situational because it depends on whether something's actually gone adversely or something's going well. It also depends who your target audience is, because you have to put things across in a term that's meaningful. So, for example, if there's a current or impending legislation coming in, it's important. For example, 2008 corporate manslaughter kicked in,
Mm.
where there's much. I mean, the accountability was already there, but there's much more higher profile that senior managers of the business could actually be held personally responsible in terms of imprisonment and unlimited fines. So sometimes it depends on what the situation is, whether something's gone wrong or potentially gone wrong, whether you're trying to sell, whether or not you've got that level of acceptance and maturity to understand risk within the business already. So I think very much situational and very
Yeah.
much organisational and strategic in terms of what you're trying to actually achieve as a desired outcome. If there's something that's got wrong and hit the fan already, then it may be legal is the only way to go, hard-nosed approach, one black or white, this or that. If it's the fact that you're trying to educate and get people's buy-in, then this is, I think, sometimes where you try and take the much softer approach in terms of influencing people, in terms of playing on the moral side of things and influencing things. And again, if something is going wrong or potentially going wrong, the financial implications to the business or to the individuals involved. So I think, it's a case, and as you become, as you know yourself, Grant, as you become sort of more attuned to the business, the organisation, the dynamics of the organisation, and to the people in the organisation, you may have to play a different card depending on who you're dealing with to have the desired outcome, either for what you're trying to achieve or for the business itself.
And Hugh, another spin-off question. In order to get that point across, and let's say we're going down the moral route, what's your view on sort of shock tactics? There's some hard-hitting videos out there that I've seen less of these days, but that there's kind of two sides of the argument there, and I've read many forums and debates around shock tactics.
I'm a firm believer in. I don't like to go out there and upset people unnecessarily, but sometimes if people think it's never going to happen here, or it wouldn't happen here, and it does happen here, then the stark reality sometimes, and I wouldn't do it. I mean, myself, I'm not. I mean, I've had to deal with enough fatalities, more than enough fatalities in workplaces. I'm sad to say, and the impact it leaves on people after it's actually happened there, it's soul destroying, and in some cases it's career destroying. And we talk about mental wellness, and the first fatality I had to deal with in a workplace was in April 2008 in Teesside in the north of England, and the biggest thing that really impacted on me was the mental impact it had on the work, not just the family, obviously, but we know family, but the guys working with the person, God bless him, who was affected at the time. Of the three guys working with him, two of them never to return to work in that environment again. That's how much they were affected by it. So I think yes, use it if again, depending on how far you need to go. I'm not. I'd sooner try again. I'm a big believer in sort of cooperation rather than coercion. But obviously, sometimes you have to take that hard-nosed approach. So some cultures as well get very turned off by it. Whereas some cultures, as you know yourself, if there's an accident on the road, the traffic on the other side slows down because everyone wants to watch it, and you've got ambulance cases out there. I'm a big believer if we can, and if we have to share what's gone wrong badly, share it, but share it with the right level of management in the right context. I'm not a big believer in the shocking tactics. I think there's enough nasty in reality, and I'm not one for the videos to sort of scaremonger people. I'm a firm believer in really in prevention rather than cure, and if we can, try and avoid these things.
Yeah.
But a lot, depending again, a lot of people that share these things to make people realise this is what can happen. But I think myself sometimes, if you talk to your people, educate people, engage your people correctly, then really, I mean, the scaremongering side of things shouldn't be there. It should that people recognise the importance of protecting themselves and protecting their fellow workers.
Okay, so similar to the previous one, it's very much dependent on the audience, the culture,
It is, yeah.
just reading it correctly. Okay.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and again, it kind of, as I said, the biggest problem is it kind of that negative effect where it actually drives fear into some of the
Yeah.
cultures, some of the Asian cultures. You know, and it was amazing because excuse me, a few years ago we made some made a couple of training films. And one of the videos, and we launched safety breakthrough after we had fatality in the north of England and Forest Teesside. Because of the lighting and the way it's affected our chief executive, some of our actual colleagues in China wouldn't watch the film because they thought, with the shadow behind, they thought it was a ghost. And just a little thing like that, just
Yeah.
so it's amazing how what you do in the right, trying to do things in the right context to set the right scene, and sometimes be misconstrued in different cultures. So I think important keeping a clear message and explaining to people the message you're trying to tell them is. Tell them the message, and afterwards tell them the message you told them. To try and
Yes.
positively reinforce the things you got across. So I think it's important that we don't misconstrue things, and we try and keep things as factual and as straightforward as possible. And again, you know, if somebody you can actually scare people sometimes, and sometimes even on the job training. I'm a big believer in making good use of artificial intelligence and new technologies. And it was amazing because a few years ago in a steel plant in South Africa, I've been pushing for years for us to try and do some simulated training before they actually got themselves onto the blast furnace, which is Iris, or got themselves working at height. We did this training in conjunction with steel plant Vanderbilt Park in South Africa, and we actually found something like 7 of the workers doing the job had a fear of heights. So they're probably unsafe doing that job, not just unsafe to themselves, but to others, particularly in an emergency. So
Yeah,
it
of
totally
course.
revolutionised how we train people and whether or not they felt they were right to work in that environment. So it's amazing what you can learn in retrospect as well. So I'm a big believer in trying to make best use of technologies rather than scaring people in the actual real life environment as such.
Well, Hugh, there is a project ongoing within the Emerging Risk Leaders Network. There's a paper being put together, a bit of a research paper around virtual reality and AI within the risk profession. So I'll share that one with you.
I'm very interested. I'd like to see that. And again, if I can help contribute, I'll put you in touch with some. I know some great guys in India who are revolutionising this fire safety training and other industries as well. It really is taking off.
Brilliant. No, thank you. So we're talking about AI and virtual reality, looking into the future. What do you think will be the key risks in 2030 in your industry?
Well, to be honest with you, the industry I'm in now, the insurance industry, it's very much about risk. But I think generally, whatever industry we're in, I think business continuity, acceptance of this artificial intelligence, new technologies, I think more and more, as we've seen already, we've talked about mental wellness and mental well-being in the workplace. I think more and more risk averseness or risk avoidance. And we've talked in the past about risk transfer, risk mitigation. I think a lot of these new technologies are going to mean that people are even more focused upon the importance of not putting themselves or others at risk. So I think business continuity, I think employee wellness, welfare.
Just to jump in,
Yeah.
during your COVID panel webinars that you did, I remember business continuity came up a lot, and the panel we had was talking about a lot of businesses now recognizing that and putting it at the forefront, that business continuity aspect. So yeah, I can absolutely see businesses doing that.
I think, yeah, and I think that's all industries across the board and both established and emerging markets as well. I think there's going to be a massive global shift in the markets. India taking off, Africa taking off. And whereas in the past we've always seen them as emerging markets, and in some respects, people have sometimes not managed the risks there as well. They've thought because they're emerging markets, a lot of, not all, but a lot of big companies could take chances there that they wouldn't take, or not maintain the standards as highly there as they would elsewhere. I think there's going to be a big shift there in terms of expectations, not just the workforce, but of the pressures placed on businesses to meet minimum requirements globally to truly
Yeah,
walk the talk and protect the people there. I think there's going to be a lot more focus going forward and preparation for future pandemics. And I'm sad to say it, based on the world that we live in nowadays, I think people are going to have a lot more risk aversion, and there's going to be a lot more focus, not just on things like cyber attacks, but also on terrorism as well. Because I think because with what's coming along in terms of this greater reliance on the new technologies, the rate of change of technologies, we're more prone to things like cyber attacks and different forms of terrorism. Right, we know the terrorism that we see, sadly, when people are attacked in the streets, but I think some of these terrorists are very smart, and they will use it to try and target established marketplaces, try and disrupt the established world. So I think there's going to be a lot more focus on risk, holistic risk, and new and emerging risks in the workplaces as well.
A really good answer. Thanks for that, Hugh. So, Hugh, focusing on your experiences, you've already shared, one example with us from a previous workplace. Have you ever made a wrong call, and how did it play out, and what changes did you make as a consequence? Can you think of it?
I think that's an absolutely brilliant question, mate. I really do. And I think the important thing is, I think to get to where each of us wants to be as a risk professional, to be our best, we sometimes have to make decisions based on what limited information is available, or what information people are prepared to share, which sometimes may be different. Because sometimes people don't like change, they're averse to change. So you have to make a calculated, risk-based approach, a risk-based judgment sometimes. And I think I've probably made more mistakes and learned more from the mistakes than you actually learn from when you get it right.
Yeah.
Because not just from a technical
negative experiences.
I think the fact that things haven't gone so well. I think the important thing is that, particularly in places, for example, building teams years ago, when you go straight into China, you try and build and develop a team, you try and implement standards. The first thing you think is that because you've always done it this way in other plants that work here, sadly not. Different cultures learn things differently, think differently to ourselves. They don't think wrongly, they just think differently. So one of the big things I learned was to try and, whilst you engage a good guy locally who can be respected and you can develop in terms of thinking the way of what the business wants to achieve, it's really important that you allow them to put that across in something that's meaningful to the people there.
Right.
And one of the big mistakes I made in China when I first moved into China was I built some really good, strong safety professionals within the regions we had. Unfortunately, at the time, it was a boom time in China. And what happened was a lot of these people moved on and earned sort of 100% more money elsewhere because they'd worked for an international company. So my plan B then obviously was to get people in, bring people in from different areas who would give us that bit more loyalty or longevity. And also, rather than developing one professional, look to develop 2 or 3 and incentivize them by training them to, for example, putting them through things like the international diploma, coaching them, supporting them as their development. And some of these people who I brought on board around 2010 are still working for the company I was with then in a bigger role and doing a great job. So I think the important thing is really learn by your mistakes. If you're going to try something where you don't have all the information and there could potentially be mistakes, be open with people, be honest with people and say, look, we're trying this on the basis of this. And be prepared to monitor closely. And if things are going wrong, put your hand up. Say to people, look, it's not worked out the way we want it to work out. This is why. But give them a valid reason as to why it hasn't worked. Share with them what the options you are to take now as a plan B to put things right, to try and, first and foremost, avoid damage limitation. But also, it may give you a chance to rethink what you need to do or what judgment you need to make the actual desired effect or desired outcome realistic. And I think it's important that, by engaging, by involving the right people in that process, and if there are things that, where you're making what I would say, a calculated judgment or a risk-based approach where you haven't got all the information, get as many stakeholders who know the business or who can contribute towards a sensible solution. It may not be the desired one at the end, but if you've got their input and their support, if things do go wrong, you find they tend to rally along and support you Whereas if you jump in with both feet and say, look, we're doing it this way without asking for any input from others, when it does go wrong, they're going to let it all end up on your chin and stay with you. Whereas if you've got a combined approach where you're trying things and learning as you go along, then people not only respect you for the decision-making process that you're taking and their engagement and involvement, but they know that you're not a risk taker. You're somebody who tries to do it on a calculated basis. And I think it's a part of building trust as well with each other as well. So I think, yeah, you learn a lot more, you make a lot of mistakes. I think I've shared with you in the past before, some of the things we've done internationally, when you think back and think, would you do it again? Hell no, we wouldn't. We actually introduced some manufacturing plants to India and to China years ago. And we're expecting to grow the foundry business quite substantially for sleeves because there wasn't a local market as such. And then what we found out, we'd actually built our little sleeve manufacturing plant in a little place. And the one was actually in a little place called Saraswati in India, a small village just outside, about an hour outside Pune. And we were going to try and supply the local foundries in the area. And one of our reps came in and says, they've already got our sleeves. What? These are feeding sleeves for molten metal? I said, well, how can they have them already? What we found out by doing a bit of undercover work was that whilst our local guys had built the plant to our specification, one of the engineers involved had also built a duplicate plant, which his brother was operating, exactly the same knowledge, technologies, not respecting any patents or anything that were already in place, but basically to try and take their share of the market. So sometimes it's, from a risk perspective and business risks, there's hidden things out there, and different cultures respect or play the rules differently, shall I say. Now, it's not all the same now. That was a long time ago, but there's lots of things and lots of lessons you can learn along the way. And I think making these mistakes sometimes makes you, I'd say, much more rounded, much more prepared, much better prepared for the next time you try and take these changes on, because you realise that yes, it may not go 100% right, and that's the important thing about projects as well. I think when you do things that go well, don't just sit and review the positives, pat yourself on the back. Sit and think, so, well, what could have gone better? What can we learn here that we can take forward next time? Or again, what would we do differently but maybe a bit more effective? So
Yeah,
I think,
self-reflection.
Yeah, and self-reflection, but sometimes not just self-reflection, getting others to reflect on you as well. Because sometimes you don't always see how you could handle things better. So it's better. So sometimes if you've got somebody who can build that relationship, that trust with, like in the mentoring arrangement, somebody will probably tell you something that you don't always want to hear yourself. Well, you could have done this perhaps better, or you weren't so good at this, or you lost your edge here when things went wrong here. So sometimes by having somebody in who's it's constructive, it's not knocking you, but how could we do things better, or what could I do things better? Sometimes the problem is when you're running international projects, knowing when to delegate and knowing what to delegate.
Yes.
So the important thing sometimes is training people, giving them the skills, equipping them to share the burden, share the task. And sometimes they're better equipped for it, or again, if it's an international, if it's a different culture, they may actually get that message across better in terms of expectations than you do.
Oh, really good, Hugh. I guess kind of the three things I pulled from that were transparency, consultation, and that direction piece as well.
Yeah, and I think trust as well, Grant. Building the people, sharing with them, but building that trust. And I mean, it's one thing. So you're still going to be ultimately accountable, but give the people the responsibility and allow them to grow as well. And I think when you're young and emerging, you want to be keen. You want to be like Atlas. You want to be respected for being able to do the task and take the task through. But I think as you get more mature in the team, I think the real leaders who get the respect, the real risk leaders, are the ones that train others and share with others and delegate that responsibility to others as well.
Brilliant. So, Hugh, last question. So, international standards. So, ISO 45003 is the first global standard that gives guidance on managing psychological health in the workplace. What do you think will be the biggest barriers for organizations recognizing and managing mental health risks compared to the more physical risks that we're used to?
Well, I think the biggest barrier to start with is that organizations generally don't realize just how big an issue this is in the workplace. Mental well-being, mental welfare, and even in COVID, the impact it's had on people working from home, or the people who've been furloughed, or the people who lost jobs. the suicide rate, not just in our country, with young males, but generally with older males as well nowadays, the impact it's had on people's mental well-being and people welfare, I think it's grossly underplayed.
Some scary statistics I've been reading recently.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing is they've got to approach it. They've got to train the right people. Now, my big concern is we've got a great country with established health and safety laws and regulations to manage the risks. But last year, 142 people were still killed in the workplace over here. Now, a lot of these the mental wellness, a lot of the psychological risks. My concern is if we don't manage them correctly and get the right people who are trained and recognise them responsibly. The thing is with a lot of the factors that contribute to workplace accidents and towards poor mental well-being at work are what I call 21st century living constraints. It's you're doing the job at work, you've got pressures at home, whether it's financial, whether it's family pressures, relationship pressures. They contribute towards accidents, but they also contribute towards people's mental well-being and welfare. And if we ain't managing the physical side of it, the actual safe workplaces well already, my concern is that people don't go in there and think, yes, we do, just tick the boxes, Grant. Yes, we've got some, yes, we've done mental health training, so we've covered all the avenues. A lot of people, yourselves, some people are more open than others. Some people will open up. Some people are more sort of resilient. They can handle things better than others. And I think the important thing is that we recognise that different organisations and different individuals have different needs. And I think there's got to be some degree of confidentiality there. I think for it to be effective, there's going to have to be a lot stronger reliance upon occupational health and professional services, perhaps more so than we as safety professionals or risk professionals do. So I think it's going to be an interesting one to see how it emerges. But my concern is that with the best intent in the world, it's a much bigger issue pre-COVID, sorry, than it was pre-COVID now. And I don't think it's going to be a quick fix. I think it's going to take a long time for us to be able to say it's, and hopefully there'll be some good companies out there, some good strong forerunners that take it well, that actually implement good systems. But all these things come at a cost, man. And my biggest concern is a lot of businesses, obviously, if they're under financial pressure, one of the first places they always used to cut back on in the past, we'll get rid of the quality guy, get rid of the safety guy, delegate it, share roles. My concern is that if times do get tough, or if times that the business is tough, they don't give it the full amount of investment or the amount of resources and support that it needs to be effective in the business. So I'm 110% behind it, as long as it's managed effectively from the top with the right resourcing, with the right professional competencies for people to do it.
No, really well answered, Hugh, and that's it. You're seeing more and more businesses, which is fantastic, doing the mental health awareness, but it kind of stops there. So the emergence of these, these ISO standards and more guidance documents, I think will slowly become embedded. At least I hope.
I think it will, and I think more case studies, and again, things like the Emerging Leader Group. The more that you can actually raise a profile, the more that you can actually share best practices or prompt people or really challenge businesses. I think sometimes people like IRSM, people like IOSH, sharing good cases out there, really waving the flag on behalf of our members of what businesses need, whether it's through confidential surveys or whatever, to say just how well are these things being implemented. As long as we can, if it isn't going so well, let's try and share that now. Not to criticise the people who are trying to do the best, but to try and make sure that, it's going to cost money, it's going to cost resources, but ultimately, it's like good safety. Good safety costs money. You don't get good safety at no cost. It's important recognising that the positive impact of this investment is the fact that you're going to create a whole healthier work environment, not just from mental wellness, but from the fact that people want to be there.
Productivity.
So the important thing is, and productivity and also longevity as well. There's that ownership, that relationship with the company. I think there's a lot of positive drivers that can actually come out of it if it's done properly and it's implemented properly. But as I said, the other problem is the fact that we don't sort of throw too much in or don't give enough resource that's needed for the businesses. And this is where I think, depending on what the industry is and depending on what the environment is, the level of safety maturity and the level of maturity towards this acceptance or this openness about, how do you feel today? And seeing the fact that, that your colleagues are behaving differently for whatever reasons and supporting them more. I think yes, it's definitely going the right way. But again, my big concern is that we try and use it effectively. And again, back to what I said about making mistakes. We are going to make mistakes with it. But it's important we learn from them and try and engage the right support and right professional support. There's some absolutely, as you know yourself, there's absolutely great people out there working on mental wellness and mental well-being that are emerging now. And it's important we try and make best use of this rather than think that, oh, it's another one to stick onto the nurse or to stick on the safety guy. It's important that people have the right competencies and also the right attitude and the right really attributes to do that job as well, because it is very different when you're talking to sort of an employee who's been used to the sharp end, who's never been used to opening up at work, and we're expecting them to come in now and tell them the cat or the dog's died. Touchwood doesn't happen, but getting people to open up and approach a different way. A lot of people are going to put barriers up. So how you actually integrate this into the way that you manage wellness in the workplace is going to be quite a difficult one for many industries.
And a bit of training there as well.
Yeah, you imagine me going up to a big 6'10" South African miner or steel worker, put my arm around him saying, "How are you today?" I'd probably end up with a spade over my head and sort of inverted in a melt. No, because it's just something. It's alien to the industry, and I'm not saying. I joke about it. It's some of these industries, some of these sort of primary traditional industries. It's going to be a big shift in terms of the way they manage things in the business. Whereas I suppose a lot more sort of the newer, cleaner, lighter industries, or office-based environments, they may be much more accepting. But and really, I think there's a lot of mental wellness issues and things like the construction industry that we don't really address as well as we should. So I think it's not something that we can sort of take lightly. It's not something that we can take a broad brush approach to. It's one where we need to really focus on what the needs and what the views are within the businesses. And it may actually mean us needing to ask our people out there first at the sharp end, what are the things and what and what's underlying these things? Because you know yourself, the amount of houses and things that are being built now, the amount of pressure some of these guys are under, and in particular, and not just that, but the people who've been off work because of COVID, who are trying to get back to work, recover, and get their lives back on track. There's a lot of external drivers that have really adversely impacted upon their mental wellness and well-being, which I think we need to try and take into account as well.
It'll be interesting to follow this field.
Yeah.
Well, Hugh, listen, that was the last question. I think we've done very well staying on track for me and you, to be honest.
I've focused back on the page a few times, but I think it's because we usually do. You're right, we do take things off on a tangent and explore other avenues. But no, it's been really good. Thank you. The questions well put together, and I think they're well balanced.
No, but thanks, Hugh, and it's certainly for me, it's been extremely insightful, and I've learned a lot from you. So, from myself and the emerging risk leaders now.
Well, it's a real pleasure, my friend. It always is.